Well, hopefully by now you have all of your transplants started, both cool season and warm season, if you're going to grow them from seed. Now we have some nice cabbage transplants here that we'll be putting in the ground just in the next couple of days, and of course that's the end of our cool season crops. And so we're real pleased with how they've been doing. The height is pretty good, but with all the weather conditions that are kind of surprising us now, we're not sure. Hopefully we can put our warm season crops in after our frost-free date, but between now and then, even though it's just a few weeks, we may have some problems showing up. And I kind of want to show you how we're starting some of our transplants this year and talk about some of the problems that you may be faced with during the next few weeks. Now, the first thing that we do, obviously, is we order our seeds. A lot of the things that we try, we have to do mail order, or we can get them from the garden centers. It just depends on the specific variety. And this year, we're growing a lot of annuals and perennials in addition to our vegetables, and that's even been more of a challenge because you have to start them sometimes as many as 10, 12, 15 weeks prior to the time you want to plant them. And most of them are warm season, so we have to plant them after the frost-free date. So we're learning a lot about how to plant them, and because of our massive planting, what we've done is plant several of them in a starter tray here. There's no dividers in it whatsoever, and here's one that I don't have anything planted in, and we've got a mix of like peat moss and vermiculite where it's very fine, because the seeds in most of these types of perennials and annuals are also very fine, and they're planted very shallow. And so what we do is we plant several of them in the tray in rows or just broadcast them in, and we can get more in a tray, but it takes more effort this way because then we have to bump them up a couple of times before they're ready to go out in the garden. And basically what we do is just use the label and just kind of cut them out, or you can pour part of the soil out. You have to be very careful because they're very fragile. And then we just try to transplant those seedlings in to a bigger pot. And now we're going to use either a 6-pack or a 4-pack, and just put a little hole, place them down in there, gently kind of pack them down. And then we're transplanting one plant in each one of these. Again, you have to be very careful on it, and some of the things that were so fine of seed, it may have been better to go ahead and plant them in these initially and then just thin them out without disturbing the soil. So really it depends on the number that you're planting. Last year, the majority of the things we planted, we did directly into the 4-packs or 6-packs, or the peat pots here, which I think many of you are familiar with, where we just use our vegetables and we just peel them off individually and plant them directly in the ground, and we don't have to disturb the roots anymore. So there's all kinds of options that are out on the market or in the garden centers for purchasing, but I'm very surprised at all the different home type products and recycling type things that home gardeners come up with in starting them. Now, many people use cups. I've even heard people tell me about the liquid detergent, the caps that they keep off of them and turn them upside down, poke holes in them, use those to start, and they last year after year. One gentleman told me recently that the dividers inside of magazines, he keeps those and then uses the little various types of tape to form his own little peat pot, and then he just sticks them right in the ground. He doesn't have to pull them out. You've probably seen in mail order catalogs where you can buy little kits to use newspaper to formulate to also make your transplant trays. And then of course, if you want something, you can recycle the plastic food containers. There's all kinds of shapes and sizes depending on the type of food that you purchase. And when you close those up, you can actually act as a greenhouse and get a lot of humidity in there, which is very important. Now, obviously, you can tell we're in a greenhouse, and we're very fortunate to be able to have access to the teaching greenhouses and research greenhouses to start a lot of our transplants with the misters that come on and high humidity. But we also start some in our hobby greenhouse. But one thing I would recommend if you're going to do this inside is when you start your seed in a tray like this, water it in obviously, and then you can put them in like a Ziploc bag. And if you have a big tray like this, you can use a trash bag or a cleaner's bag, anything to trap in humidity and hold that humidity and act like a greenhouse to get the seeds germinated. Also, like on our tomatoes, things that need good warm soil, you can purchase, even in a home situation, little heating pads now through mail order and at some of the garden centers that will warm up the soil that way. If you don't have access to that, a lot of people will stick them on top of the refrigerator to get them to germinate and then move them over for more direct light after the seeds come up. And again, there's all kinds of problems that you can be faced with in a home situation when you start your own transplants. And probably the biggest one is overwatering. So you want to be careful because there's some diseases associated with overwatering and in keeping the soil too wet. And I'm going to point out here is one called Post-Emergence Damping Off, and there's some seedlings right here that have fallen over at the ground level. There's one right here as well, and they have brown lesions on them. And what it is, there's 2 or 3 different types of pathogens that are in the soil that like moisture. And what happens is they feed on the stems and cause them to fall over and will actually kill the transplants. Pre-emergence damping off just means that the stage occurs under the soil before the seedlings ever emerge. And so you'd have to dig some of those up to see if that's occurred. But we do have some disease problems, again, because it's too wet. Now, the chemicals that one would use in a greenhouse are probably not available for the homeowner to purchase. So one thing that we do in starting these is maybe place them in trays. And I've got one off to my left here. It's just a serving tray, a meal tray. And we just set them on there and water them from the bottom, similar to what you would do with African violets. That way you keep the moisture off the foliage, that type of thing. So watch your watering. You need to let them kind of dry out in between. It needs to be damp until the seeds germinate and then let it start drying out. And it's easy to overwater because until the seeds start germinating and get roots and start growing, they're not going to use a lot of water to begin with, so be very careful. The other thing is not enough light in a home setting. It's easy for us to start transplants and they stretch and get real tall and leggy and spindly, and that's usually lack of light. So you either need to get them closer to the windows, and if you're like us in Stillwater, we've not had a lot of sunlight this year, so the transplants are looking pretty ragged. So then you may need to invest in some type of a lighting system. And a lot of people have commented, well, we have one, but our seedlings are still too tall and leggy. Well, you need to get the light down closer to the plants and then move it up as time goes on. Now, another thing to be careful with inside your home is once the seeds come out, they may still be stuck on the cotyledons like we have here. And because of the lack of humidity in a home situation, sometimes they'll stick and you may need to help pull those off or knock them off, where in the greenhouse it's usually not a problem. Because if the cotyledons remain stuck, it could cause them to rot or die on you as well. And then once you get the transplants going, like here we've got a tomato with 2 that we planted maybe 2 or 3 seeds in. So now we look, we're pretty confident that one of them is going to be the main one. So we'll just come in and cut that one off, or we could transplant it in another pot depending on how many we need. And one thing too, if you overwater and lack of light and you don't have a lot of humidity, you may want to try some good air circulation. And we have a fan even in the greenhouse blowing right over some of the plants, and that helps not only in causing the plants to harden up a little bit more, but it helps dry the soil out and keep the disease organisms from spreading too much. So good air circulation will help in a home setting as well. Now once you get them ready, don't forget to harden them off before you take them outside and plant them, because our hot temperatures and windy temperatures or cool temperatures, depending on the crop, can be very devastating. So at least 3, 4, even up to 3 or 4 days up to a week, set the plants out in a shaded area outside, let them get used to the temperatures, the wind, harden them off before you stick them outside, and then later in the summer plant the plants maybe like in the evening where they don't have the stress from the sunlight all day. So there's all kinds of things you can do, and hopefully if you want to try your hand at growing transplants, you've probably missed the time for this early cool season and our warm season crops, but now's a great time to start ordering seed and preparing for the fall garden later on this summer.